Hey everyone, and welcome to another Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Jack, and I am joined by Eric. How are you doing today, Eric?
I'm doing pretty good. I had a nice little day. I did some chores, wrapped some presents that I realize I need to wrap probably now because I'm traveling with them. So
yeah, you got to get on top of that.
And I am a horrible rapper. I do such a terrible job, and yet somehow I always get left to wrap the presents because my wife leaves town, and that just it's a lot of pressure to wrap presents perfectly.
I can understand that, especially because continuing the journey of harmony or harmonies from the last podcast, I received it in the mail today, which is lovely, and it's undamaged, but undamaged to my surprise because there was zero packing material in the box. So,
the box itself is a packing material.
Yeah.
No, it had plastic wrap around it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It made it.
It's fine. It's fine.
It
worked out, so clearly I'm the fool. Well, today we do have a topic that we're going to be talking about, which is teaching games. We got a suggestion for this from Zombie 8 Heart. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's probably how it's pronounced. That's how it's spelled. They suggested it back on the Iliad and Icor video we did back during the summer, and we thought that was a great topic. I mean, I think I have pretty strong opinions about it. I teach a lot of board games. I've taught board games at our little small convention, so I've tried a lot of different strategies, and I think I know the ones that I have found most useful. So yeah, we thought that was especially since one of the community members suggested it, it was a good one to kind of dive into.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that in just a minute, but as always, I want to start with just talking about some games. You been getting anything to the table lately?
Yeah, so my wife left town, so now I have free time alone at home.
A lot of solo gaming.
A lot of solo gaming has been done. So I, kind of to help me figure out exactly where Harmonies stands, I've been playing both a lot of solo Harmonies and a lot of solo Cascadia, because for me those board games are in very similar realms. So I just kind of wanted to gauge, for me that's one of the bigger reasons why I keep Cascadia, on top of it being a very easy game to teach to people and a very pretty accessible theme. I also think that the solo mode on it is it's cozy, it's a little puzzle, and sometimes that's what I'm hoping to figure out is just how do I get the most points on this turn. I only have 4 turns left. I've really done myself quite dirty the rest of the game, so I'm not reaching my high score, but how do I get the most points out of this scenario that I'm in right now?
Yeah, how's it shaken out? Are you feeling like Harmonies is taking up the mantle, or are you feeling like they're delivering different things right now?
They're slightly delivering different things, but Harmonies, I feel like in the same amount of time it takes to play through 1 to 2 games of Cascadia, I'm getting through 2 to 3 games of Harmonies, and it is I feel like I'm making more impactful choices every turn in the solo mode, and it just is Harmonies is kind of running away with it, at least in the moment, in terms of what weird tile laying game do I want to play that has a cute animal theme. Harmonies is really definitely been my preferred at least compared to Cascadia.
I imagine that a lot of gamers are faced with the same decision, and it's just a little bit worse for people who are reviewing games or who are the uber gamer of their group, where you have these big collections. But space is at a premium, right? Yep. And you have to make decisions about these games. And in a perfectly reasonable situation in which you only owned 10 games or something, If you really loved Harmonies and you really loved Cascadia, then great, have them both.
Yeah.
But in my situation, I am constantly working against the rush of games that are great games that I can't keep all of them on the shelf. And so I have to make hard decisions about, is one of these the preferable game that I want to play? And because I'm me, I feel guilty about the games that I don't play that are on my shelf. And so I don't need that kind of baggage in my life. I don't need to have extra games. And so what I really try to think is, sure, even if I like both of these games, is there a situation in which I'm playing one of these that I would rather be playing the other? And if I can't really find that, if I'd pretty much 10 out of 10 always be rather playing one of these, then that's the game that I'm going to stick with.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm having a time with... I really feel quite confident that I'm enjoying Harmonies more, and at least in terms of like reviewing the game, or at least just kind of forming my own opinion, because we haven't really sorted out exactly who's doing that one, but we're, I'll have opinions that I can contribute one way or the other. But for me, I'm trying to figure out, like, if you own Cascadia, is purchasing Harmonies $40 more worth of fun, or however much?
My answer is yes, easily yes, because I don't like Cascadia. But if you own and like Cascadia, well, then I guess that's a harder decision to make.
Yeah. But. So that's been a lot of my playtime, and then I've also put in some time into Imperium Horizons, which is another game that you don't like. You might like Imperium. You might like Imperium Horizons. You haven't played Imperium
I've gone
Horizons.
back on this. I think I was being particularly spicy when I did the Imperium review, where I was just like, you know what? I just don't like it. I don't like it. I don't want to deal with this because I found the game particularly finicky and it wasn't really a good fit, particularly at that time. I want to like it. I wanted to like it before it got over to me, and I still want to like it. The promise of what it's supposed to deliver is so juicy, but it didn't work out for me, though. I'm hoping that revisiting it, particularly getting a chance to play it with you, or finding a chance to play it at a convention or with someone else, I may come around to it. Are you finding Horizon substantially different, or kind of like a new thing compared to the two sets, or I think it's only two sets that came before?
Yeah, it was two sets before it, and now there's Horizons, which is roughly the same amount of factions as the base two sets. I'm liking it a lot. I think that the trading is interesting. I'm not feeling like it's clicking in the solo mode, because it just requires so much more play interaction. So I feel like that part of the game, which is like a significant, there are like, I forget off the top of my head, but there are like 6 of the factions in there that are like, you should only play these if you're also going to include the trading module into your gameplay. So it's been a little... I can see it working once I'm able to get it. I haven't played a multiplayer yet. I've only gotten it solo so far, because again, I have looping back into the theme of this podcast, I have nightmares about teaching Imperium to people. I've literally woken up in like sweat in the middle of the night like a year or two ago of like, oh, thank God I'm not teaching Imperium right now. Oh, I had a nightmare.
It's an obtuse one for sure.
I think that it demands so much of the players in terms of knowing what certain keywords mean and what certain actions do, and it, I think, is just a little bit... I really like it because I put in all of that time to learn those things because I was so intrigued by the premise, and I'm really intrigued in like how to design all these different factions, especially like player asymmetry is sometimes not really necessary. Sometimes it's a really cool feature for a game. Like, I think that there is a time and place when asymmetry does really work well, and I was really intrigued as to how that would work, and I loved it because I took a lot of time to learn the rules. But now I feel like it's a solo-only board game because nobody else knows how to play this game. And I really do not want to teach it because, as we'll get into later, I think that like choosing a board game for the group you're playing with is about 80% of how difficult it is going to be to teach somebody a board game. Like,
it's a very specific game, and I think it hits with a specific audience. And I'm kind of surprised that there's a element to Horizons that really focuses on the multiplayer element, because I kind of got the impression from the community that Imperium was one of those games where it is preferred solo, or if not preferred, that it's at least very highly recommended as like a solo first game, and to either lock content or kind of soft lock content by making it, you know, obviously geared towards the multiplayer play. Seems like an interesting decision.
Yeah, and I can't really say for sure. I mean, I think for me it is, you can still play with the trading module in solo mode. I just have felt like it just becomes more administrative work in a game that already has a ton of administrative work of just remembering when do I need to do this trading, when do I get my return from having this trading card. But I also think that it is maybe a trying to encourage more player interaction, because even in the base game, it is like the only way you can interact with people is like attacking them, and for the most part, attacking them is just they have to abandon one of their lands. And that's like the only way you're really interacting with somebody else's game state.
Right.
That or taking cards from the market away from them. And so I think this was trying to create another way where you can interact with the other players without it being aggressive. And like with the trading module, this is a this is a positive thing. You are helping them out, and they're also helping you out. So it is like you're interacting with them in a way that doesn't inherently mean they need to abandon a land. So I think that there is a little bit of maybe they were trying to give people other options that weren't just attack the other players. I'm not sure yet, because again, I haven't played it multiplayer because of reasons.
Well, I'm sure we'll get an update on that.
Yeah.
As far as what I've been getting to the table, I've really been playing a lot of Kinfire Delve. Kinfire is a huge line of games that I feel like has suddenly come out. There's Chronicles, there's Delve, there's a new one that is just coming out on the horizon. But Delve is a 2-player box. It can be played up to 4 players if you have multiple sets, and there's 3 parallel release sets, each with 2 characters and its own unique scenario that you play against. But it is just a really addictive 2-player cooperative card game. It reminds me in some ways, in scope, of Set a Watch, in that it's a fantasy adventure card game that you have your heroes with some unique abilities, and you're essentially just having to slaughter endless amounts of enemies. But this really taps into some of the RPG kind of elements in having different categories of challenges that you're facing. Some of them are combat oriented, some of them are obstacles or puzzles. There's interesting keywords that link up with one another, and it just has this great momentum to it that reminds me, if anything, of something like Solitaire, that it's almost like therapeutic, and you can play it solo and it works great single-handed solo, but even with 2 players, it just has this repetitive ongoing forward thrust that works really well for it. It is challenging, it is tough, it's interesting. I've yet to see all of the characters. We've only played with 4 of the characters. each of the sets has a name. I can't recall the names of all three of the sets, but I played with the vampire, the kind of weird like wood robot guy.
Yeah, with the vampire.
I so would, especially one that looks like Dominique Tipper from the Expanse series. And then we have the orc tactician, and then there's like kind of a roguish bard dude. And so far, all of them have been really unique. All of them have been really fun. So I'm hooked on Kimfire Delve. I think since coming home from PAX, we've played it, or I've played it, or we've played it with Christina here at least 5 times. And then I played a bunch of other stuff, but the only things that I wanted to mention, I was looking at my plays for 2024, and I was like, you know what? I played so many new games in 2024, and I put a lot of time into playing games that are new to me. A lot of repetitive plays in those, and I want to still play some of my favorites. And I noticed that Spirit Island only had 7 plays, and I was like, I'm going to make the push. I'm going to get 3 more plays of Spirit Island in before the end of the year, while still juggling all the other plays that are getting for covering games, for the new hotness and what other people want to play. So got it played the other night once. In fact, last night. Played the dog, like the Daehan's best friend spirit. That's one of the new ones from Nature Incarnate. A lot of fun. Really enjoyed it.
Right.
And I hope I'm going to get the remaining 2 plays in. But it's good to treat yourself, play some of the old favorites. And then Katmai. I've been playing more of that. It's a really interesting game. I think I mentioned it on the last podcast, but it's slighter than I expected. Have you had a chance to play it yet?
No, I did read through the rule books the other day as I was just in bed and had nothing else to do, and so I picked up my copy of Katmai that I keep on my bedside table.
Your bed night.
Read through the rule book. My bed night table.
Good night, bed night. Without getting too much into it, other than it's a cool game with a cool Alaskan theme, there's one mechanic in it that blows my mind because it seems so obvious in retrospect, but it's the first player can be voluntarily given away at the beginning of a turn. And in almost any situation, you don't want to go first. The only reason why you want to have first player is because it gives you priority for breaking ties. And there's a couple other small things, but for the most part, you can just voluntarily say, all right, I'm giving you first player, now you're first player. And that sort of voluntary disposal of authority in a game is something that I haven't really seen before, and it makes for a really cool strategic decision that it's a light game. It's a very light game. It can be played in about 20-25 minutes. Very low mechanical overhead, though still some interesting decisions. But that little thing is just like a great little flourish that I think is emblematic of what some of my favorite Osprey games do. Something very small, very subtle, but has really juicy implications, and just feels like, wait, why haven't I seen this before? And it's probably been done before, but I just haven't been exposed to it. So Katmai is certainly interesting.
Yeah, rad. I mean, I think that it looked really cool. I think especially with the theme seems like, I mean, we both lived in Alaska, you still live there. I think that it's a really interesting concept. I mean, like, Fat Bear Week is massive in Alaska. Like,
and it gets a lot of attention worldwide. I mean, obviously, having a British war game company publish a game about Alaskan bears is pretty interesting in and of itself. And while it may seem like a strange theme at first to be something that Osprey is going for, because they're known for typically war games, it does work pretty well because it's all about dominance and control and, intimidation, two sides of a line, like whether or not these bears are actually that clan oriented, that you can group them in a binary way.
They're either cinnamon or sandy. Those are the only two colors of bear. They travel in different factions. It's like it's
Jets and Sharks,
and the Jets.
Yeah.
Weird that you said it in that order, and I said it in the other way.
Yeah.
You're a Sharks person?
I'm a whatever person is going to get me out from having to talk about 60s musicals. As much as I like them, yeah, the snapping was going to start. The snapping was bound to start. All right. Well, let's get into talking about teaching games. Eric, you've taught at conventions. You've taught games that you've designed. You've taught games as one of the weirdos who is like, hey, I'm bringing a new game to game night every time, and you are inflicting games upon other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you like teaching games?
I do. I mean, I think that I'm a person who reads board game rule books for fun. Like, that is a thing where if I don't really have an intention of like playing the board game in the near future, but I'm just like, that has like a kind of interesting theme and it has a weird mechanic mixed in there. I don't own this game. I don't really think I'm ever going to own this game, but like I'll pop onto BGG and go to the files and find the official English rule book if I can, because I find it interesting how games work in a lot of the ways. So I do typically have like a fascination with how the different mechanics of games loop together, and I think that's a little bit because I have aspirations to be a board game designer, where like I'm interested in how to make these mechanics come together to serve the theme. So I think board game rules are fascinating for me to just learn about, and I think that translates to I like sharing the excitement of, oh, this is a really cool rule of like, and this is actually going to come from a game that I don't I've taught far too much, but like teaching people how your actions in Arc Nova rotate out.
I knew it was going to be
saving
Arc Nova.
Those. Well, I for our Platypus Convention board game in Juneau taught Arc Nova to people for 3 days straight.
Mm-hmm.
All I did for 3 days is teach people how to play Arc Nova, occasionally other games.
And something to be aware of with Platypus Con, and maybe it's this way at other regional cons, but Juneau as a community is a very plugged in and engaging community who, on the whole, likes supporting local things. And for being an Alaskan convention, you get hundreds of attendees, which is great, but there's a lot of people who are coming to Platypus Con who are just like, I don't know. I went to the drag show last week. I went to the Perseverance Theater the week before.
Yeah.
I'm really into, the local arts and crafts. I've never played a board game outside Monopoly or Scrabble, but sure, I'll go to this one. It's at the Jack. I'll go hang out there, see what's going on. And so there's a lot of casual audience that are coming in, or people who are really dedicated, like Magic the Gathering players, or families with kids. And so I think even with a game like Arc Nova, you're probably sitting down with a good mix of people who may have varying experience.
Probably at this particular moment are going to have much more fun playing any game other than Arc Nova. And just important note for our audience that I just think you guys should know. When Jack said the Jack, it's our convention center. He's not referring to himself in the third person.
Yeah. People are not coming to visit inside of me.
Let's go to the Jack.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that I've taught a lot of board games through that, and then also just through going to our local board game nights and just being like the board game enthusiast in my family and friend groups that are not through board games. So I've taught a lot of board games, and I think that I touched on it earlier. Figuring out which games are probably at a level where your friends are going to enjoy them is going to get you over the hump of it sucks to learn a new game that is like way too complicated for you. Like that is just, there are some board games where it's like, again, just going back to Ark Nova, because that's the biggest example I have. I taught that board game to people who have not played like really any board game that has come out since 2015 or earlier. Like they might just be on the Hasbro Brothers, and that just might be what they got. Or is it not? Yeah. So
Parker Brothers. Hasbro Brothers is what I guess Elon Musk, when he buys Hasbro, what that's going to look like.
Yeah. So I think that first things first is try and figure out what rough category are the people you're trying to teach. Is it experienced gamers? And if it is, there's going to be a different way of teaching them than it is going to be for people who are newer board gamers and newer to the hobby. Even if you're teaching the same game. So like in theory, if it was like, just for example, Seven Wonders, like that just is a game that I feel like is a little awkward to teach people if they haven't played any modern board game. But it also is like a little bit different than a lot of other modern board games. So it is something that you will need to teach even newer players might have a difficult time with it. Not because it's a complicated game, but just there are so many systems that it's hard to see. Sometimes, like, if you have a complete blank slate of how does this game work, that's a game that is, maybe you're teaching it to new players or people who, like, have gamed a lot. And I think
there's something to be said about, I've always had frustration with the concept of a gateway game because I don't want to be that gatekeeper, right? There's a lot of people who are like, oh, you should start with Cascadia or, whatever it is. Harmonies is a great game to use as a gateway game, which, it will be broadly attractive, teaches some novel concepts, and someone can build up off of there. But I really do think that the best gateway game is the game that's going to get someone the most excited, as long as they know what they're getting into. I have known people who have come into this hobby with no real experience with modern board games whatsoever, whose first modern game was War of the Ring because they loved Lord of the Rings so much, and they saw this epic giant game that they just felt emotionally connected to and were like, that's the experience that I want out of board games. And I think what you're really saying is you can have that be your first game, or that you don't have to have a particular game to a particular audience. It's just knowing your audience when you're approaching the game and like what level you have to take in the explanations that you get.
Yeah, like for one of the examples I fully agree with that. One of the examples I was going to give is I had people who had not ever played a modern board game, and Wingspan is definitely not a heavy game. But it is also like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. If I had to on a completely blank slate choose a game to teach somebody that has never played a modern board game, Wingspan probably wouldn't be my first choice. But I had friends who were super into birding. That's the perfect choice. That is the game that if you are going to be able to get emotionally invested into it, people are going to be will take the time to learn the rules if it's a thing that they're really stoked about the theme, or if it's like Lord of the Rings and they're huge Lord of the Rings fans. Like that is going to do so much of the heavy lifting of just getting them to give you the time needed to teach the game. Because all games require a certain amount of time to learn. And getting people to just gift you that time.
You got the people at the table, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the game is.
Yes.
And they're like, all right, Eric, teach us how to play this game. What's your opening volley?
I try and make sure that people understand the theme first, and it goes along with my...
Completely agree.
It goes along with kind of just my theory of, I want to get people emotionally involved into the game before we start getting into the nitty-gritty. So it's like, if we're playing Clank, your adventure is diving into this dungeon and you're trying to rob a dragon. Like, that will get you... that can get you a lot of the way there, because also I feel like a lot of board games, not all of them, some have take a hard left turn there, but most board games have rules that fit into the theme, and so you can start weaving that in, where like in Clank it is you're trying to get in, the goal of the game is to get the most treasure out of the dungeon. Treasure is represented by this symbol, and showing them that symbol and being like, this is how this is your ultimate goal. On your turn, you can sneak through, or you can do things that are going to create noise, which will attract the dragon, and that is what Clank is. And I feel like a lot of these things that might have been harder concepts to explain to somebody becomes a whole lot easier once they have a better idea of the theme and how that theme interacts with the game. I also, and this is one that I saw in the Shut up and sit down.
What was that?
Nothing. We definitely won't have to bleep that. But the Shut Up and Sit Down, they have a video on teaching board games, and one of the things that they mention is having the fiddly bits that people can play around with and like touch and like move around is very engaging to people right off the bat. Like, give them things to touch. Give them things to interact with so that they feel connected to the board that is there.
Yeah, one of my go-to strats for something, because I've spent most of my adult life in various leadership or mentor roles. I've done a lot of volunteer work, in which I've worked with kids, and I've also, in my professional career, done a lot of supervising, leadership, and recognizing with learners, particularly adult learners, that people don't want to look dumb. You know, like that is the number one fear or obstacle that I find that people have as an up and coming gamer in this hobby, is that there's a hesitance to look foolish or dumb or incompetent when playing a game, and that can make someone feel really rigid and not able to grasp as many rules. So I try to set the bedrock that, you know, like, this is totally, for fun. Don't worry about it. And rather than worrying about like all of the how you win and, you know, like all these other things, I'm just going to start showing a couple interactions. And so, for example, I'll put a piece in someone's hand. Last night I was teaching my kid's friend how to play Skull. And I was like, all right, don't even worry about how this is going to flow. Just take one of those cards. Doesn't even matter which one it is. Look at it and put it face down. And then what you're going to do is, on your turn, you're going to either put another one face down or say, I'm going to bid. And just do that. Just do that. You know, having the cards in his hand and not even explaining what the consequences of it are right away. As long as someone feels like they can be in this environment, you could do a short demonstration of like, all right, so you did that, and here's what that means. I'll do that in worker placement as well. I'll be like, okay, so we're sitting down on your turn. You're putting out these workers to get things. So, for example, you know, try taking one of your workers and put it on any of these spaces. And okay, I don't really know what this means. They put it on a space, and I'll be like, okay, so this shows that you get wood for going here, and here's what's, you know, going to yield. And then on your next turn, you can put another worker on another space, and here's going to be the consequences. These are some of the things that I do for people who don't have the developed shorthand of just understanding what a worker placement game is, or definitely what a trick-taking game is, or ladder climbing or card shedding or all of these shorthands that we use within the hobby. But I think that initial tactile involvement is particularly good for kinesthetic learners, and can kind of remove you from that larger overhead of we're playing a game, one of us is going to win, one of us is going to lose, or we're playing a cooperative game but we're all counting on each other to do this or else we're going to lose and you're going to be super embarrassed. Just kind of getting into the fun of manipulating pieces and doing a thing, and feeling like, hey, we're just learning, we're having fun, we're kind of moving on. I certainly wouldn't structure a whole game like that, but just as an introductory demonstration, I find gets much more engagement, much more attention, and kind of takes some of the pressure off from having to just listen to someone say a million words at the beginning of a game, and then you're held accountable for understanding what all of that meant as you're actually functionally going through a game itself.
Yeah, and I think that there is so much to people learn in different ways. And I had a lot of friends, especially back in Juneau, some of my closest friends who I would play board games with. One of them she could not listen to me talk for 10 minutes explaining the rules. And I didn't do that. Because I also think it's a bad
Why
way
you got to do that to people, Eric?
But that was a big thing with her where I knew that if I was going to be teaching her a game, I need to get her taking turns as soon as possible, even if she doesn't know what they are. So I also am a very big believer in test turns of just hey, we're just going to do it. Do whatever you want. We're going to reset. This won't affect how this game works. Or once you actually get playing, this won't affect anything. But this is going to be you're just going to start learning what consequences your actions have. What do you lose out on by doing something? What do you gain by doing something?
Right.
And on the topic of shorthand, one thing that I think as the person teaching the board game, super important is teaching people the icons in the game and what they mean. So I think a lot of more modern board games have started transitioning to using icons more frequently, which I think is helpful for looking at a game state and knowing where everything is, and also knowing what your cards do. But if you don't know what those icons mean, that is meaningless to you. And in a lot of ways, I think teaching people that in Dune Imperium, a green card, that symbol means you draw a card. That's what that symbol means. The intrigue card symbol means you take an entry card. That is what that means. And making sure people know what these symbols that they're going to be seeing frequently mean, so that they can better process the information. And I think a lot of that comes with, why don't you go to this space that has that symbol? Okay, everybody, so what that symbol means is draw a card. That's all that symbol means. It doesn't mean anything else. Whenever you see that symbol means draw a card. And so then I would have them draw a card, and we'd keep going through the test turn. And I think that people who learn visually can see that does, that symbol means that. And people who learn by actually doing the thing learn by going, okay, I've placed my worker here, I'm drawing a card. Cool, that information is in there. And then people who learn by listening. I am one of the very silly people who learns by listening. Most people can't just listen to somebody talk for 20 minutes and be pretty good at gathering that information, because that just isn't a really natural way of learning for a lot of people. Which is why it's not really a good way to teach board games.
Yeah, I solicited some information on our socials, and I got a couple of responses on Blue Sky about teaching games, people's hot tips, or some stories that they had, whatever. And so I pulled a couple that caught my eye. One was from Spielmoss Festival, which is a cool festival that happens every year. A cool celebration of board games in the nights between Christmas and the New Year's. But they said make sure you leave room for a lot of monitor and adjust. There are multiple ways of learning, and reference the theory of multiple intelligences. And paraphrasing the rules might not work for everyone. State the goal, review the game, play a practice round, be prepared to scrap the game for another. I agree with that to a degree. Generally I want to, when I'm sitting down with someone, I go like, hey, here's, some options on different games that we can play, and I give that sort of nutshell pitch. But once we've opened a game, it would be very rare for me to be like, all right, we're going to cut this game because clearly it's going to, be too much for you, or I can see that you're having a bad time. Mainly because I find that if someone's already feeling self-conscious and like a little overwhelmed, it's a delicate proposition to be like, well, let's switch to something for, your baby intelligence that you can handle. You don't want to belittle or demean them by switching to something else. You do want to leave them room to abandon. But generally, I'm not finding I'm in many positions where I'm playing a game that is going to be too much for someone once we've gotten to the time to set it up, get it on the table. If it were a real desperate circumstance, I may pivot at that point. But for the most part, I would be like, hey, don't even worry about it. We're going to get through this together. It's a really complex game. Don't sweat the details. I'm going to help you through this. You wanted to play this game. Almost always, if I'm teaching a game, it's because the other person wanted to learn that game. And so I want to help facilitate as good of an experience in doing that as possible. I do like the reference to multiple intelligences, like we were talking about. People learn in different ways. And realizing that any sort of guidance that we could give, that any number of other content creator channels could give about, hot tips for playing games or strategy tips for playing games or, different ways of doing things, they're not going to be catch-alls. So, understand the audience, be willing to tailor your approach to them. And sometimes even asking, how best do you learn? Would it be best if we just went through the rule book, or do you want to try a couple test turns, or do you want me to give you the full rundown of everything? I do think that it's good to have your compass, right? Your North Star of what you continue to bring things back to. And to me, the backbone of any game is twofold. It's the theme. How can I relate this to something that someone who doesn't have context for this game but does have context for the theme in some way, shape, or form, can understand this on a thematic level? And even some really abstract games can, be distilled on this thematic level. Some people are like, oh, well, Tigris and Euphrates is just a pasted-on theme. Well, that may be, but you can still explain the game on a thematic level of what's supposed to be represented there. And that gives someone some sort of context to link the mechanical concepts to, and I think that really helps with retention. And the other thing is victory. What does victory represent? How does whatever I'm doing right now or whatever someone else is doing, how does that contribute to the overall thrust of the game? What is the intended consequence of what's happening here? And I may not get into the layers deep of strategy, but I'm at least going to give some context for why I'm doing something or why someone else might be doing something, why I recommend that they do this thing in a turn. And then just as a general tip, as a younger brother, don't get into situations where you find that you have to dominate your opponent when you are teaching them a game.
No, please don't do that.
Don't flex as you are teaching a game. No one is going to think you're cooler for, beating them at a game that you've played a million times before and they're just learning for the first time. And it will sour their experience both with that game and board games in general.
You gave me a thumbs up, I think.
Oh, did
I? Don't know, like a little bubble popped up.
Did it happen again?
Did it pop up for me? Oh, yeah, it's there. Yeah, I got you. I got a little bubble
nice.
on you. I think on
way to go, Skype.
Way to go, Skype. I think on that note, and this is very geared towards people who are new to games in general, so this is maybe a bit, this is part of the original topic, but like teaching board games to people who are new, you aren't going to remember that you won that game. And I'm not saying throw, but I'm saying don't do like the dominant strategy that works because you've played it. I taught Wingspan the other day. I was like, I'm going to try a strategy that I have never really tried before. I'm going to try to do these things in weird ways just to see how it works. Like, how does that make the game function? And because I did that, I still ended up winning, but it was very close and they felt like they knew what they were doing the entire time. And it's not like I ran, like, we all had like a very good, okay, cool, that was really close. And they felt good about getting close to beating me because they knew that I had played the game a lot and I learned more about the game. And I think
you didn't have a hot duck goose engine that was just like feeding turn after turn of crazy amount of tucked cards.
No, I've taken the Ravens out. The Ravens are out of my copy of the game. The Australian Raven is still in.
Coward.
They take the fun out of the game, and that is the thing that I will stand my ground on. I take the Ravens, the Killdeer, and Franklin's Gold. Those are out of my game. They're still in the game. They're still in the box. They're like tucked away. But I just think that those games that, and this is very much a tangent, but those games limit the decision space because it's as soon as you get those cards, you are actively playing a worse game by not doing everything you can to put those cards into play immediately. Right. And I think that is not my favorite.
I get it. And much discussion. There's much deliberation on those Ravens in particular as to whether or not they're a good inclusion in the game or should have been erratated.
Eradicated. Eradicorvided.
Yeah, something like that.
I was trying to figure something out. It didn't land. It didn't quite work.
I did want kind of your sense of this hot take here. Another one of the responses I got was from a friend of the channel, Greg Loring Albright, who's a wonderful game designer and game professor. He's like a PhD in board game design and teaching. He said, my hot take is the importance of how you win as a first to mention part of teaching games is vastly overstated. I've taught plenty of games with here's how you take a turn, here's a good goal for your first 2 turns, then a turn or 2 in, say, okay, here's how you win. What's your thoughts on this?
I think that how you win is an important guiding light for a lot of mechanics in a lot of games, where it's like the reason this mechanic is important for me to teach you is because it's how you win. I can agree that I don't really feel like I need to get into the nitty-gritty of how, like, I don't need to be very direct and like mechanical of these are the like 4 avenues of how to win. But like I do think it's important to be like with just to go back to an example I've already used with Clink, all of the mechanics are around you are trying to get the most treasure. Like a lot of different mechanics for a lot of different games feed into that because that is kind of the point of the game. I think that I can see it being overstated in terms of I don't think that you work from there backwards. Like I don't think you start with here's all of the different ways to get victory points and then going into okay, so here's how you get the resources to do this action. But like starting off with you are trying to get the most Prestige as a jewel seller for Splendor helps people kind of guide their eyes of, okay, well, here's what I have to do to get that ultimate goal of winning.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair point and a good compromise, and probably something that Greg would really agree with. I do think that explaining the path to victory in a granular sense is going to lose a lot of people because there's so many steps involved, especially on a more complex game. But, using that thematic concept that we're talking about, and then also in broad terms, making sure that someone understands, this is a game where the player at the end of 8 rounds who has the most points wins, something like that. I think there is a lot of value in that. And certainly I, as a learner, and maybe I'm an outlier because I've played so many games at this point, but that's one of the first things that I'm looking for in a game is, what is my victory condition? Not just do I need the most points, but, do I need to have a specific game state to win, to trigger the end game? Generally, I try to, as a learner, think about the scope of the game. I try to think about, approximately how many turns or rounds that I'm going to be given to kind of play around in. So a good example of this is Harvest or the White Castle, where when I'm explaining it to people, I say, hey, this is a game where you're going to accomplish a lot, but it's going to be in a very tight network. Yeah. So every action that you take is a very deliberate action that has a lot of consequences, as opposed to a lot of other games where you may have many, many, many turns. Several things could happen on an individual turn, but in the case of the White Castle, you have 9 actions in that game, and that's it. Harvest, you have 12 actions, and that's it. That there can be a lot of things that happen in concert or multiple avenues to take any of those individual actions, which makes those games sometimes challenging to teach. But understanding the scope is something that certainly I, as a learner, am looking for.
I agree. I think that, I was just going to say that I agree. I think that making sure people know what kind of game it is, and this is a tip that I have for teaching games to people who are gamers, try and find reference points where it's like humans are creatures of pattern. Like we enjoy seeing something being like, oh, this is like that. And that goes a massive way to teaching games. So if you can just kind of figure out what reference points you can use for people who have played a lot of games, that can really get you a long way. So, again, just going back to Seven Wonders, telling people that is a tableau builder. It's kind of like Abandon All Artichokes with more long-term strategy and a weirder point scoring system. That can let people know, oh, this is the type of game I'm getting into. And then that also goes back into... that helps them understand what they're trying to do in this game, and that sets expectations. Which I think telling people, you have 9 turns in White Castle and that is it, sets expectations really, really well.
Yeah, and I think that there's always an importance in anything that you're teaching is checking for understanding. Making sure that you're not just losing someone and their eyes are glossing over and you've overloaded information, because if they got lost on one thing and are stuck trying to consider that and you're continuing, then they're not retaining anything else that you're giving them. So give opportunities for breaks, ask questions like, does that make sense? Or do you, are you picking it up, or do you want to try that out? Like I said, even asking someone, how do you best learn a game, can be really helpful. So I think asking questions, even as the person teaching the game, is going to go a long way in making sure people feel comfortable, like they're heard, like they can clarify. It's the reason why anytime that you're in a PowerPoint presentation or some dissertation or anything, they pause for questions. They pause to make sure that people are understanding. that they're comfortable, and that's going to go a long way in not just helping with that retention, but helping remove some of the stakes that an anxiety of learning a new game, especially as someone new to this hobby, can experience. Feeling like you're there, holding their hand, you're helping them out, and tuning yourself to it. So I think in review, we're talking in thematic terms. We're choosing games that people are interested in playing. And once they're at the table, we're making sure that we're kind of approaching in ways that work for their level of context based off of their experience and what game that you're actually teaching. Let's see. What else did we cover?
Making sure that you are guiding them through how the theme relates to the mechanics, because I feel like that helps people connect them and learn them more inherently, making sure that you are giving them things to fiddle about with so that they are actively engaging with the game at all times as much as possible. And practice turns, like just letting them do actions and play the game in a sandbox where they can feel free to mess up. Because I agree, like a lot of people are scared of learning new games because they're scared of looking silly or failing or coming off as not smart enough to understand the game. When you're learning a new game, and that is part of learning anything, is that you're not going to know what it is to start off with. So giving them like practice turns to just mess around, see what happens, in a way that you can really easily set the game state back to, okay, cool, now we all know how the game is played, we're going to reset and try it, now we're going to do like an actual play.
Right.
Yeah.
Take the pressure off, ask a lot of questions. Even if you're in the actual play, if someone makes a grave error and they're, giving that Arrested Development, I've made a terrible mistake type of face, take the pressure off, make sure they know that it's okay, try to laugh with them, and make sure that you're checking for understanding.
Yeah.
And certainly don't just go like, I am going to wreck face. Think of yourself, even though we as gamers, oftentimes the reason why we're teaching someone is because we're trying to recruit someone to play the games that we want to play.
We're trying to get new gamers.
And as part of that, we want to play that game. And so we're like, oh man, I really want to play White Castle, so I'm going to play the best damn game of White Castle that I could ever play. That's not facilitating that other person's experience. So don't throw the game, but, don't go hard, as my son would say. He'd be like, Dad, you didn't have to go so hard. And it's like, well, what a man must know, a boy must learn.
But I saw the path. I saw the golden path.
Yeah, we're Paul Atreides here.
Yeah.
Like, move over, kid. Well, I think we did it. I think we perfected how to teach games. Mm-hmm. No one else is going to have to come up with anything at this point.
Yep, this is the one and only video to watch to learn how to teach board games. Definitely don't watch like a specific board games how to play. That won't be helpful. That won't be helpful. Just watch this video again.
All right. Well, let's move on to a couple questions. We got a couple questions. You can send them into cardboardherald@gmail.com, or you can post them as comments on this as a video, because we posted the last one as a video. So I think we're just going to stick with videos and podcasts. But either way, find a way to communicate with us if you just have general questions or questions about the specific things we're talking about. So David Matson asks, hey guys, in relation to the recent Apiary Expanding the Hive video, you said it's a more stuff rather than a new stuff expansion. What's your preference and why?
That's a great question. That's a really solid question. I think for me, it depends a lot on the game. And that kind of feels like a cop-out answer, but like, I don't know. I think that like with Spirit Island, introducing new stuff is really awesome and they do it frequently, but I would personally be totally fine with just like the Feather and Flame expansion. Those are just 2 new spirits. I'm totally fine with that, especially if I know that going in. But that's a board game that it's so complex because the new spirits are just more like it just adds another thing of like, ooh, how do I make these levers work? And I guess that one kind of is new stuff versus more stuff too, of like, is Feather and Flame new stuff or more stuff?
Well, I think it really does depend on the situation, but my innate preference is a more stuff expansion when it is like some sort of asymmetric thing, you know?
Yeah.
If it's Spirit Island, I want to see more spirits. That's the most exciting thing. Like, yeah, you may have different island combinations that you can do now. There might be a campaign mode or some other thing, but I tend to not like modularity in like game rules. I like much more, I get to play with all my toys, and sure, some of that may plug in and out, but I'm not having to have a different scope of a game. Like, I generally don't like games that are like, well, this is a competitive game, but here's a new cooperative expansion that bolts on a different game mode or anything. There are exceptions to this. Like, I think that Lords of Waterdeep is a good game, but Lords of Waterdeep with Scoundrels of Skullport is a great game. And that's completely introducing a new set of mechanics. Spirit Island is one of my favorite games. It is my favorite game of all time. And the Branch and Claw introduces the different tokens for all the different like beasts and wilds and event cards and that kind of stuff. And to me, that is my preferred way to play. And I don't think it would have elevated to such heights for me without what that game ended up becoming. But that kind of gets a pass because I know from interviewing the designer on this very channel that that was part of the original game. And then Greater Than Games was like, yo, settle down, cowboy. Let's maybe take off this part because that's a little bit more, and let's just have the game as is, and then you can introduce this later on. I think it was actually simultaneously released, but it is expansion material that was part of the original game as designed. So in that case, you know, it's additive in that it brings new things to it. And so those are examples of when I do really like that. But for the most part, I don't know. I get tired of learning new crap all the time. And sometimes I just like games the way they are. And Apiary is a great example of a game that I really like. And then the expansion is just more of the stuff that I really like, sometimes in new ways. Like, there's new interesting things that are happening with it. It's not like it's just a dead on the floor expansion, but it does have you know, familiar elements that you don't have to have a lot of overhead to integrate, but you'll still see some new stuff like, oh, that's cool how that combines with that, or how that utilizes the pre-existing mechanisms. You don't need extra boards to play it. You don't have to have like a brand new game mode to play it. And certainly my least favorite, you don't have to have a level of modularity where you're leaving a quarter of the game's components in the box.
Yeah, and I think for me, while I like new stuff a lot of the time, if I already like the base game, adding new stuff on typically doesn't fix a game for me. And I think even games with a lot of asymmetry, sometimes I am good with what we have. Like, for example, like if Dune Imperium or Dune Imperium Uprising released a expansion that was just like, here are 6 new leaders. And that's you're just getting these 6 things, and they might have a little weird new tidbits, but it's just more leaders. I'm probably not going to like go get that immediately. Whereas
what's wrong with you?
I just think that
I mean, Dune Prophecy is on HBO right now. How else are we going to have like a bunch of old women as
HBO
leaders?
tie-ins, yeah.
Yeah,
everybody. Gals Night, Night, taking over Arrakis.
Wine moms of the
Real Housewives of Arrakis.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, that's great. But like for me, I think that it is. I wouldn't buy that expansion, but I would buy like the Rise of Ix. But even within that, I think that I really need to know that the new stuff is going to connect with me before I spend money on an expansion for a game that I already like. Because like I think that some of the things in like Dune Imperium, Uprising, and Bloodlines seem cool. I already own Dune Imperium, so I don't... And I already have some expansions for it, and I feel like I don't know how much more I'm going to get out of it. And also how much more complex it's going to be. Because in a lot of ways, like with you, if it's a game I really like, sometimes that game is just going to be a game that I want to play as is. Because I know how this game works, and I don't have to do like the mental workload to learn how this new complexity adds in.
It does, of course, expansions lean into consumerism. That's like part of the whole point of them, is that you're trying to make a games as service model in this cardboard reality. But there is something weird when someone like me who loves to collect things, I am the exact target, right? I love comic books. I love records. I love guitars that are over my shoulder. And so there's this sense that if I don't have an expansion, that I'm somehow missing out on the fun. But oftentimes, if I do have the expansion and it's not perfect, then it just sullies the experience. So what I'm saying is board game publishers make good stuff and thoughtful stuff and not garbage.
I think
it's giving me anxiety.
Just to put I'm actually answering the question, because I feel we talked about it a lot, but specifically to answer the question of whether I prefer new stuff or more stuff expansions, I tend to prefer new stuff expansions, just because I think a lot of games do have like a fun benefit of, if there's something new or weird, those are the things I typically will go out and purchase, because if I already like the base game and there's just more of it, and I'm sure I'll like it, that's not going to make me like run out and purchase it. But if it's a thing of like, I don't know, with Furnace, just because I have been playing that a little bit recently, I haven't gone out and purchased the expansion because it is, you can now have a 5th player, and there is a solo mode included, and there's more factories, and it's just kind of more of the base game. The solo mode does intrigue me. There is a solo mode somewhere on BGG that I haven't played yet, but I know it exists. I just think that it is probably a totally fine expansion. I will get it at some point or another, maybe, but it doesn't seem to introduce anything new, and so I'm not going to go out and buy that.
What a state we're in, where there's this expectation that everything has an expansion. This is neither here nor there, but it reminds me, thinking of Lords of Waterdeep, the sort of, for lack of a better word, poop show that Lords of Waterdeep's initial release was. I was there the day the strength of men failed. When on the board is printed a 6th player color that was not in the box, and it was the horse armor of board games. It was the thing that people pointed to, like, this is the most ludicrous, capitalist bull crap thing I've ever seen, that they are just planning on milking you with more things down the road. There's a 6th player that is printed on the board that's not in the box, and they're going to get you for that down the road. And now it's just an expectation. Everything is going to have an expansion. that's just the life of games at this point. Do you remember the first board game expansion you played? As a quick aside.
I mean, this is probably a little silly, but Catan, Robber and Knight.
Yeah. Well,
Or
for me,
Castle and Knight. I forget at this point exactly what it's
Knights
called.
and Castles.
Knights and Castles.
There we go. That sounds right. With the little flip boards and everything.
Yeah.
I like that one. When I was a kid, it completely blew my mind because this was before downloadable content or anything for video games. I mean, I think this is before I had even heard of the internet. Yeah, it definitely was before I had heard of the internet. In the early 90s, I had HeroQuest, and then there were expansions to HeroQuest that were like side adventures that you could get and like different versions of your characters. And those were highly sought out in the secondhand market. But yeah, it blew my like 7-year-old mind that you could have a board game and then there could be another box that you could get for your board game that had more stuff for your board game, and it just existed in partnership with that game. And at the time, I had no real context for Dungeons and Dragons or like any of these other war games or things that may have supplements off to the side. But I think that actually became the blueprint for the idea of expansions down the road, and may have been an influence on some of the earliest expansions to video games. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, I mean, this is getting really into the weeds and speculating. What is a podcast for if not speculating? But I wouldn't be surprised if some of the blueprint for early games like Castles of the Wind or even Diablo that might have had expansion or modular content looked at things like supplements to D&D games or even HeroQuest, which was a popular board game where you could make a retail product that required the base game to play but would be off to the side and additive to it. We should do a whole podcast sometime entirely about expansions. Just maybe do some history, do some research. Maybe we could get scholarly on that. I don't know. People should put comments about what we should do as these things. Anyway, we're going in with the fun one.
Yeah.
JL.
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. JL, I'm not sure what JL stands for. Maybe Justice League. I'm going to pretend that the Hall of Justice sent us this memorandum.
Superman wants to know.
Hey, today the new Superman trailer came out.
Who did it?
Crypto wants to know, Eric, what game component would taste the best?
All right, I'm going to answer this with the understanding of the question is if it were real.
If it were
what it is meant to represent. Like
if it tasted the way that it looks.
Everything is going to taste like wood or plastic or cardboard. So I'm going to go with like, I mean, I think it would be really easy to just say something that is an actual food, like maybe the cards from
No, put that to the side. Put that to the side.
Fun.
They're disqualified. I have a ready answer.
Oh, go right ahead.
Those Azul tiles, they look like Starburst. They look like delicious, bespoke chocolates that I might get in Europe or something. They look amazing. When they talk about like a feast for your eyes, those Azul tiles are, like I'm getting hungry. I'm getting a little sweaty looking at those things going like, oh boy, I just want to eat one of those.
A little bit on that note, Splendor, the obsidian, or I think that might be what it's supposed to be. It's chocolate. I call it chocolate all the time because it just looks like chocolate.
Right.
I think that would be a great answer too. But like all of the gems in there look like little sour candies, and then also there's a chocolate there.
Okay, so since Christina is a freak, Christina being my wife, and maybe has some sort of undiagnosed pica or something, I'm going to answer on her behalf here, but as literal, she's a big texture person, and the Forbidden Island lion is a certain type of like softer, gummier plastic that she, every time we play that thing, is like, it's the plastic that you just want to chew on. I'm like, what's wrong with you? I'm worried she's going to come downstairs in the middle of the night and take chomps out of the lion in the box. Like, she doesn't want it to taste like anything else. She wants that to be exactly what it is. She meets that lion where it is.
She's like, I would like to eat this lion.
Yeah,
it feels chewy.
The Everdell berries are also, I think, in that category. They're a little bit softer.
Look like nice berries. Those look like they'd be very juicy, like very plump blueberries, maybe.
But she's like, these are close, but they're not like the lion. They got a little more give. I'm like, starting to feel weird about this lion.
I'm trying to think what else would be in that neighborhood. Less Christina's taken, more like unconventional. What would taste good if it were the thing it is? Do you think like any of the Gloomhaven or Frosthaven characters would be like nice if they were like roasted?
Which Gloomhaven character looks like they would taste the best based off of their artwork? Who looks like they shower the most or least? And maybe that adds a little aroma, a little flavor to it.
I think that the Mind Thief, if you slow roast the little worm, could be good.
I
say this as a vegetarian.
Without getting into spoilers, there is another Vermling character who has a pal in Gloomhaven, and that pal, let me tell you, perfect. I think we've taken this.
One of the miniatures, like if it's the Mind Thief miniature that's just like right there, like that's a nice little pop that in your mouth on the go.
I think that's like stabbing the roof of your mouth with a Dorito. Well, I think we've taken the food discussion as far as we can, but I'd love to hear from the audience. What do you think would be the tastiest board game component? However you want to interpret that. And also, what's wrong with Christina? Maybe we could get some feedback on that too. Put it in the comments below. And I guess if you have any questions for us about this or anything else, email us, cardboardherald@gmail.com.